An update on drunk driving in the region. Good evening. This is CTV News. I'm Rochelle Metzger.
And I'm Denise Douglas. So glad you could join us this evening. The Washington Regional Alcohol Program is out with its 2015 preliminary How Safe Are Our Roads report.
Its president presented the early findings to the Council of Governments Board of Directors today, and the news is not good. CTV's Karen Adams is here with more.
It is definitely not good, especially knowing that we have high traffic here in the region. And this report is not quite alarming, but we should pay attention.
Okay.
Definitely pay attention. And again, these numbers are preliminary, but the report finds alcohol-related traffic fatalities have increased while DUI arrests have decreased in the DMV. What's more is that the numbers are higher than the national average, with drunk driving deaths here in the DMV up by 40% and the national average standing at 31%.
That there are more people that are drunk driving than there are men and women in uniform looking for them. That's just the reality. Look at the numbers that we said, the 17,000 that are annually arrested in DUI in the greater Washington area alone. There are not 17,000 members of law enforcement looking for them in the area. It's extremely frustrating that they're outnumbered. So if they're not adequately stepping up to do this because of staffing issues, I think that's a significant concern.
Now, RAP is pulling numbers from Prince George's and Montgomery counties, D.C., Arlington, Fairfax, Prince William, and Loudoun counties. Now, the final report is due out later this year. Erickson tells me they're still waiting on results from both Prince George's and Montgomery counties, and they have to make sure they separate the alcohol-related cases from the drug ones. So this is not really a final report, but it's still
the preliminary numbers seem to really get everyone's attention.
Definitely, because it's higher than the national average.
In terms of solutions, Karen, what were those discussed, or will those come in the final report, or where are we with that?
Well, they're going to be recommending, more patrols. Right now, as you heard in the clip, he stated that there are not enough officers out there making the drug-related arrests out there. So they're going to have to do that. And there's also legislation needed, more legislation. Although Maryland, they did point out that Maryland, just this last legislative session, they approved a plethora
of legislation. It just hasn't taken effect yet.
Exactly.
All right, thanks Karen.
Thanks for that information.
Thank you.
Hearts are heavy at Clarksburg High in Montgomery County after 3 juniors died in a crash in Damascus late last night. Investigators say 17-year-old Jacob Dennis lost control of his pickup truck on Barnesville Road and struck a tree. Dennis and 2 other passengers, identified as 18-year-old Patrick Shiflett and 17-year-old Gary Green, all died in the accident. A Montgomery County police captain says there's evidence that the teens had just left a party for seniors who graduated today. Meanwhile, the investigation into the crash continues.
Justice delayed but not denied in the trial referred to as the blinking ID case. A jury has found Jermaine Hales guilty of murdering Melvin Pate during a drug robbery gone bad. Hales shot him back in 2010, leaving him paralyzed from the neck down. Unable to speak, Pate was able to identify the triggerman by blinking at a photo of Hales during a lineup. He died from his injuries in 2012, and the case went through a series of hearings and appeals to determine the victim's competency and whether the video of the ID would be admissible.
Blink once for yes. Melvin.
The 4 co-defendants, including Mr. Hales, decided that they wanted to rob Mr. Pate for drugs and money that night. They didn't know that Mr. Pate would also be armed, and when they showed their gun and said that it was a robbery, fired upon the victim, Mr. Pate fired back.
In this case, the blink was determined to be a dying declaration. That was the whole issue that had to be determined by first the Court of Special Appeals and the Court of Appeals, and that's what makes this case so unique. It's never been determined in Maryland before that a blink would be a dying declaration.
When the police officers went to the hospital with the victim, they told the victim to blink once hard if he recognized someone in the photos that he was being shown. So it wasn't the involuntary blink that we all do. It was truly a closing of his eyes and opening them, and you could see tears coming.
According to Also Brooks, this is not only the first time in Maryland, it's only the 4th time in U.S. history that a blink was used to constitute a dying declaration and allow a victim to identify the perpetrator. Hales faces life in prison when he's sentenced in August. Meantime, Atlanta man is sentenced to a decade behind bars after pleading guilty to first-degree assault and use of a handgun in a crime of violence. Joseph Clay fled from a traffic stop on the BW Parkway last October and attempted to shoot a police officer, but the weapon didn't fire. State's Attorney spokesman John Erzin says Clay was a passenger in the car when it was pulled over by county police for suspicious activity.
As they began to follow the vehicle, which was moving very slowly on the BW Parkway, they got behind and tried to initiate a traffic stop. When the vehicle stopped, Mr. Clay, who was actually a passenger in that vehicle, jumped out of that vehicle and began to flee on foot. He was pursued by a county police officer and at one point brandished a handgun and turned and tried to fire in the direction of the officer who was pursuing him.
Erzin says there were no bullets in the chamber. That's why the gun wouldn't fire. Prosecutors are glad Clay took responsibility for his crimes, but they add that the state's attorney's office has zero tolerance for anyone attempting to shoot a first responder. And you're watching CTV News. I'm Rochelle Metzger.
And I'm Denise Douglas.